Can the Rockyverse continue to exist without Rocky? Find out when Johnnie Torch reviews Creed 3. Well, welcome into another Johnnie Torch review. Today we're going to be taking on Creed 3, the long-awaited third movie in the Creed trilogy now. And this would be the ninth movie in the overall Rockyverse franchise. Now, some backstory to this before we get into the movie proper. As you know, Rocky, the original movie, big classic, Best Picture winner for 1976, went on to spawn a popular sequel in Rocky 2. Then in the 80s, Rockies 3 and 4. Some people kind of bristled at the continuing. I think every Rocky film was sort of thought of as the last Rocky film, and nobody certainly thought it was going to turn into a franchise. But then, of course, it became sort of like an action hero franchise in the 80s, which some people deride, although those are my favorite movies, actually. I mean, I really enjoyed 3 and 4. Um, we'll get into my ranking of them possibly on another video. I don't think I'll get into that right now. Rocky 5 was, at the time, heralded as the final Rocky film in the franchise. Um, didn't really please fans. I don't think it really pleased anybody, and a long time went on where Stallone could not make a Rocky 6. I think he stood away from it purposefully for several years, kind of like letting the, sort of letting the chips fall where they may and kind of letting things settle before trying to right the ship, so to speak. But unfortunately, by the time he got to doing Rocky Balboa, uh, MGM and the powers that be were sort of dragging their feet. And I remember him honestly putting out, he had a magazine at the time, which I can't remember the name of, but he was putting out pages of the script, which would eventually become Rocky Balboa, in his magazine, hoping he could generate enough interest so that MGM would take him seriously and greenlight the movie. And that kind of ties into where we are now, where Stallone has no rights, no actual rights to the franchise. So after Rocky Balboa, Stallone kind of put Rocky away. He felt that that was a more fitting resolution, and I think the Rocky fandom, agreed that that was a great way to end it. But a few years go by, and Ryan Coogler comes in and has a pitch for a Rocky adjacent film called Creed, which was going to be about Adonis Johnson, who, of course, is Creed's son. And the idea was that he would seek out Rocky to be his mentor and trainer. And this, pleased Stallone enough to become part of the franchise once again. And they made Creed. It was a very popular film. I enjoyed it as well. And Stallone was nominated for a Best Actor Oscar. A couple years later, followed with Creed 2, which Ryan Coogler stepped away from because he was working on Black Panther. Then Stephen Caple Jr., I believe, was the director on that one. Stallone was going to direct, and Stallone provided the screenplay, the story, I guess, for the film. And some difficulties there. It turned out that they weren't going to give him the directorial role. And it seemed like at that point, bad blood had completely boiled over. And at this point, there's a very public feud between Stallone and his brother, Frank Stallone, with Irwin Winkler, the original producer of the original Rocky film and pretty much all the Rocky franchise. And Stallone doesn't have, again, I don't have the full details of this, but Stallone does not have the say in the Rocky franchise anymore. Whatever say he had apparently is being taken away from him because they were able to do this film without him. And from what I understand, Stallone would have done the film, but for Irwin Winkler, and he has a very public feud going on with him right now. He also made claims about the film being too dark, and he didn't appreciate the direction it was going in. We'll talk a little about that when we get to the movie proper. But so, setting the stage, it looks like Stallone and Rocky will be left out of this franchise indefinitely because he will not come back if Winkler is still attached. He made a statement to the effect that he wanted to leave Rocky to his daughters, that it's his baby and he wants the franchise in the hands of his family, and that there is no deal that they could come to where he will have that kind of control over the property anymore. Now, again, this is a big deal because Stallone made a lot of sacrifices to make Rocky. He envisioned himself in the role, and it's a very famous story that basically the movie about the underdog was basically mirroring the real life story of the underdog Sylvester Stallone, who wasn't getting choice roles. He was basically being a a thug or something in various minute parts in films, and he knew that he needed a good vehicle that would be able to catapult him to the lofty endeavors that he was seeking. He took a pay cut. He took a ridiculous pay cut in order to get the funding to make sure that the film got made. And of course, it paid off in dividends. He got, of course, Irwin Winkler being the producer is where he gets into this story. He's part of the lore because, basically that's the ground level. That's where he came in. And with the deal that I suppose Stallone had in place, he was not going to get the rights at any point. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like George Lucas. He took like precautions and safeguards that he would be in control of the franchise, but with Stallone he couldn't get that kind of leverage. I guess, he was basically an actor that was trying to get his project off the ground. I mean, in Lucas' case, maybe it was a little more so that he was he was a grad. He was being mentored by, you know, um, Capella. So in this case, it seems to have come back in the end to sort of be a pretty resentful arrangement now with Stallone. So, with that all out of the way, basically a long roundabout way of saying that Stallone's involvement is nil now. And last we heard, or at least last I heard, he wanted to have some kind of Rocky movie. And like I said, since MGM has to greenlight it, and since they're going with the Creed franchise and they're really not interested in what Stallone wants to do, I think what Stallone had in mind was a story where he was going to take in I think, a Mexican immigrant and train him. And that was sort of going to be like, it seemed like almost like a Creed story all over again. And I guess that's why they passed on it and they instead went to Creed 3. So here we are now at Creed 3. Now, again, before we get, we'll do a little more history here. Before we get to the review proper, my feelings on the Creed trilogy, like I said, I liked Creed 1. I thought it was a good idea. There was some moments that I didn't like. There was the concept of Adonis being the project of an affair between Apollo and some other woman. In other words, Apollo cheated on his wife, which produced Adonis. Again, I wasn't sure that that was a great thing, but then without that, there's no movie. So it's kind of like you kind of have to be able to give them that one if you want to have this franchise, because his children would not be old enough to box, or I should say, they would be too old to box. And another thing was, I think they had the drama was somewhat manufactured. I think that Rocky acted a little out of character at times. Adonis is kind of impetuous and a little overbearing at a couple of times in that movie. So I liked it, but I didn't like it more than any of the other movies in the Rocky franchise. With the possible exception of Rocky 5. Similar feelings towards Creed 2. The only difference being is that they had a great story for Creed 2. There was a lot of great potential in the story of the Dragos versus the Stallone, the Balboa Creed. And it would have felt a little bit like what happened with Rocky 3, the alliance between Creed and Balboa, and in this case it would be another thing, like a generational thing to take down the Dragos. And they really, it felt like a big mishmash of a movie. They didn't really connect Drago with Rocky enough, I don't think. They had the one scene at the beginning and then they kind of see each other in the ring. They cut out a scene that was supposed to be a altercation in the hospital between Rocky and Drago, which I think would have gone a long ways to sort of giving that impetus for for the final act. But they kind of just wash all over that. They just wipe it out that basically Rocky doesn't really want to have anything to do with this feud. And you kind of feel like it's just a missed opportunity. And I think another missed opportunity was we don't see Rocky ever share the screen with um Marianne, Apollo's widow. Well, they do share a scene, but I'm saying we don't see that first time they reconnect after whatever it's been, 30 plus years. So again, there was a lot of missed opportunities in Creed 2. I did prefer it to Creed 1, but I think it was still kind of lacking in some respects. All right, so we come to Creed 3. Um Before we get into the spoilers, I usually try to give a quick thought for those of you who don't want to get into spoilers yet, but you're anxious to hear something about the movie. I think it was very well done, particularly considering that Stallone didn't have any involvement. Um, did I feel that Rocky was missed? Yes and no. They again, this is spoilers, I guess, but if you want to know that, I feel like they should have referenced him, even with the old fashioned TV staple of, well, we got a postcard from Rocky today. He's having a great time with his grandson in Vancouver or something. They needed to sort of establish where Rocky was. Now, they don't really mention him, so they could take this in any direction. They could bring Stallone back if, the stars align or whatever. They could just say that he's passed on at this point. You don't really know. And they leave it very ambiguous like that. I would have preferred that they gave us some kind of concrete, bringing us up to date with what Rocky's doing and where he is and how his life is going. Did Stallone really need to be in the movie? Story wise, I don't think so. I mean, I think the only thing that he was missed very much on is of course, the subsequent fight, the training montage. The training montage felt kind of light without Rocky. I think that would have added the punch, no pun intended, needed to sort of punch up the training montage and have him come in maybe in the last act and give him a couple of sage words and sort of call back to the Rocky franchise a little stronger than we did here. But for the most part, Adonis is on his own here, and there really isn't a whole lot of callbacks to the Rocky franchise. It's mentioned about the Rocky Apollo fight, and they make some, under the radar homages, so to speak, to the fight. And we'll get to that in just a second. But I think really it's a good, solid movie, and it really stood on its own. I don't think, I mean, you really don't need to see the rest of the Rocky franchise, I guess, to enjoy this one if you're curious about that. But it probably helps. All right, so we'll get to the review at large here. So what happens is Jonathan Majors, of course, he's sort of the it boy right now of film. We just did a review of him last week in Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania, a film that I enjoyed. It wasn't perfect. I think a lot of people are sort of selling it short though, but it was better than average. That's the way I would put it. And he put in a good performance there, and he puts in a good performance here. It does feel like two different characters. I don't feel like he's playing Kang again. He has sort of a a very malevolent presence. You kind of feel like there's something not right with this guy. Like he's gonna go off at some point, but you still feel bad for him, and you still kind of feel like, I really hope this guy gets his stuff together. You know what I mean? He really, he could really do some great things if he just like keeps it together and he doesn't let it, destroy him. And to an extent, we see that descent where he's like trying to keep it together, but he you can just tell simmering underneath. beneath the smile, so to speak. He's sort of simmering and ready to explode. So the film opens up with Creed and his rematch with, oh, I forget the character's name. What is it? Ricky Hatton. He's the character he fought in the first Creed film, and this is sort of his rematch because he's going to retire. Adonis is going to retire as the champ, and this is sort of just the rematch, just for the sake, of it. And in the first film, he lost to Ricky, and in this film, now at this point at the end of his career, he ends up beating him, and he's going to retire. One of the things about the film is they don't really explain Adonis' age, and that's another thing that's strange because we have Jonathan Major's character, who is Diamond Damian Anderson, who's a couple years older than Adonis, and he is like trying to make his way on the scene while Adonis is being sort of touted as past his prime, and he's, this is not really anything different for the Rocky franchise because basically they were acting like Rocky was past his prime in Rocky 2. You know what I mean? It was like, well, he's kind of washed up now. He's 33 years old or something. So, it's kind of the same thing here. Adonis can't be much more than 33, 34, I imagine. And they're already acting like, well, he's pretty much at the end of his line. But then we have, Damien, who's actually a couple years older. I'm guessing, if I'm to guess, I would say Creed is probably like 32, 33. And I guess Damien's supposed to be like 35, 36, maybe. Um, but again, it works in that same kind of hyper reality that the Rocky films work on. I mean, like I said, we're talking about a franchise where Rocky was almost blind in Rocky 2 in one eye, and yet he continued to have a thriving career for, four more movies or five more movies. So we get the introduction, and there's a history between these two, and it's told in flashback off and on during the film. But to basically, flash forward and let's get that whole storyline encapsulated. When they were kids, uh, Damien was kind of a bad influence on Adonis, but he was still an all right kid. He was a prize amateur boxer, and Adonis was sort of like his corner boy, something to that effect. Well, after one of his fights, they go to the corner store, and Adonis beats the crap out of Leon, which you don't know for a long time was sort of their abusive foster father when they lived together in foster home. And people are trying to break up the fight, and they're going to beat up Adonis. And so Damien comes out with a gun, and Adonis takes off, but Damien ends up holding the bag, so to speak, and ends up getting put in jail for a number of years, 18 years, which sounds like a long time for this kind of offense. Well, they lead you to wonder if he killed somebody, and maybe that's the reason why he's been put away for so long. But they do have like the throwaway line that he's had a few more years tacked on, apparently for not so good behavior. And again, this is probably what Stallone was talking about, where it was going to a dark place is something he didn't really want to do with this story, and that's why he didn't really have any interest in the story to begin with. But it could have been a lot darker. It could have been a whole lot darker. I mean, we're talking about child abuse here, but they could have gone a lot darker with that. So I didn't really have a problem with that. They just have like the vaguest of flashbacks to try to show that, I guess, that he was abused, but they didn't go there, in other words. So I felt, all right with this subject matter. I don't think anybody really wants to deal with child abuse in your escapist entertainment, but they just alluded to it. But the thing is Michael B. Jordan, of course, a great actor, and he really puts a lot of emotion into that. And a lot of scenes are of Bianca, played by Tessa Thompson, who is much better here, of course, than in the Thor movies, where she really evokes Adrian more in this film than any of the others, where she's sort of playing the better angels of his nature, so to speak. And she's, in Rocky's case, she would be the one to try to tell him, you don't have to fight, you don't have to prove anything, and this and that. In this case, what Bianca is more trying to let him make peace with his past and try to figure out how he's going to deal with this. And so he really, in some good emotional scenes, manages to you know, convey the story to her of child abuse, even though it's like something he doesn't want to discuss. What I complained about a lot in Rocky 2 was I think there was too much of the domestic stuff. It really dragged it down, and that was also something I complained about in Rocky 2. So it's not just like the Creed characters are not as interesting or something. I mean, yeah, they don't have a Polly, and there are some other things that maybe could have changed. But I think with like Rocky 2, Creed 2 suffered from a lot of, well, there's like a pending engagement and a pending wedding, and then there's like a childbirth, and there was a lot of things that like sort of pulled attention away from the fight. Now I'm a guy that loves Rocky 4, where that was all about the fight. There was the fight with Apollo, there's training, there's training, there's training, and then there's a fight with Drago. You know what I mean? You got a few domestic scenes in the beginning that's just very lightweight. I think in this film they kind of understood that and they backed off a little bit of the domestic stuff. We get a little bit of Creed's daughter Amara, who is deaf. Now, this was something that was like it was kind of like a cliffhanger in Creed 2. She had tests and they showed that they were not that she was not able to hear, but they kind of left it that, well, it's early yet, maybe we'll be able to find out if her hearing is developed or something. But yeah, flash forward like about 5 years later or whatever this is, she is deaf. Bianca, of course, has been going deaf since the first movie, but I can understand why they haven't progressed that, because you would really have like only one person in the family that is able to speak, that would be completely sign language through the whole movie, which of course I don't mind because of subtitles don't bother me. But I think that was trying to keep the pace of that there had to be some conversation in the film. So Bianca is fortunately still you know able to hear. Then we get also Felicia Rashad back as Marianne Creed, and this was kind of a problem to me. I didn't really have a problem with her dying in the film. This is kind of something that they do in the Rocky films all along. It was Mickey, it was Apollo, it was Adrian off screen, and then Polly off screen. You kind of see all the support characters go in the Rocky franchise. So I kind of understood this and expected it. But the problem is, like I said, I felt like there wasn't a lot explored with this character too much. I've always said one of the things that I think they missed the boat on with the Creed films is they never addressed that she had two other children with Apollo. We don't see them interact with him. We don't see them interact with her. And again, I don't necessarily want this to be a soap opera, but if you're looking for what you would expect to be a part of his story, it would be his interacting with the two other kids. We've seen them in Rocky 2, I believe, and we haven't seen them since. I suppose now I don't really know if there is the possibility of Creed 4 after this. I mean, I suppose they're going to try to go to the well as often as they can, which means that there's probably more potential stories to be told. That should be one of them. Now, maybe they should have introduced these two kids into the story. Of course, kids, they're in their 50s now, probably, but the two kids of Apollo and Marianne, they should have introduced them earlier. Now, will they introduce them maybe in Creed 4? Will that be fodder for another sequel that somehow this is going to be, something to do with them? I don't know. It would be interesting to see if they do that. My problem with that death scene, again, it was very well acted. It was as well as a death scene could be done in the Rocky universe. It was done, but it really slowed the pace down, I think, and I will get back to that in a second, because that was my real gripe with the film, was how it basically changed gears. There's act 1, there's act 2, and then they kind of like cut off what should have been another 10-15 minutes of act 2 and then just jump into act 3, the final act. That was my problem. But again, going through this, so this was, I thought, very clever and very well done. Now, you see, a lot of reviewers that I have heard talking about the film, they didn't like this. I actually liked this. Now, what happens is we set the stage where Adonis is now like a promoter, and he's promoting a fight between Felix something or other, Cortez, I don't remember, and Victor Drago. Now, this was a big surprise to me. They bring Drago back, and that they're kind of okay with each other now. They're like buddy buddy, because Adonis is like promoting this fight for the championship, because since he's retired now, Felix is the champion, and so on and so forth. And the idea is that, he uh, Damien, he meets up with Adonis, expecting basically that he's going to get him into the scene, get him a title shot, and this and that. And Adonis is like, whoa, 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 bro, don't work that way. You can't just like come out of nowhere and then you get a title shot. But the clock is ticking on Damien. He really doesn't have, like I said, him being like whatever he's supposed to be, like 35 years old. He really doesn't have time to climb the ranks and become a ranked fighter and fight for the championship. So, and he invites him over, and they're yakking away, and it's like you get the sense that he wants to do something for Damien. Adonis does. He wants to help him out, so he like brings him into the gym, and he's like, spar the champ and this and that. So he takes it a little too far, and this is where the subtle homages come from, like where Rocky was brought in to be a sparring partner for Creed initially, is what they were telling Rocky. That's kind of like what they're doing here. They're going to bring him in as a sparring partner, and instead of not taking cheap shots like Rocky said he wouldn't, uh, you know, Damien really goes, to the wall with Felix. And so they go to this party for Bianca, and uh, Damien arranges to have Victor Drago taken out of the picture by having somebody like whack him over the head, for lack for lack of a more uh, colorful term. And that takes Victor out of the picture. Now, again, this is something that I think people objected to. I didn't object to it because it harkens back to the original Rocky. So Adonis is like, well, we need another opponent for Felix, the champ. He's got to fight somebody, and to defend the title. So why don't we put Damien in? He'll be the sub. He'll make it for a good fight. He's coming out of nowhere. It's another Rocky story. The champ is taking a challenger with basically no record and is going to give him a shot at the title. So I didn't mind that because it harkens back to the original Rocky. A lot of people are saying that would never happen. Well, a lot of things would never happen if we were doing the Rockyverse in real life. So he gives him a shot at the title, and I think what sells this for me a little bit better is they were trying very desperately to convince you that Damien had a life ahead of him. He had a career ahead of him. He had you know the greatest accolades that a amateur could have. That he was going to be Golden Gloves. He was going to be Olympic gold medalist. He was set for all these things, but all these things were taken away from him because of the unfortunate event that happened that was because of Adonis. So you get the idea that he, kept himself in shape and he was in that kind of condition to begin with. It could happen. This was like a first also in the Rocky franchise where he is like a dirty fighter. He's like throwing elbows and using his knees and hitting low and it did feel different because that's what's another thing, and we'll get to this a little bit later for the last fight. I don't mind. Now, of course, this was Michael B. Jordan's directorial debut, and I don't mind that he tried to make this a little different than what we've seen before. I don't know if that set well with a lot of people, but I kind of felt like because he put in some anime influence into it, some Dragon Ball Z, and you could see where, you know, it's like Damien is focusing on a certain part of the body. Even Adonis does this at times in the movie, and he's zeroing in, and then they like slow mo. There's a certain punch that is connecting, that is making the most impact. I didn't really have a problem with this because we've seen in the Rocky franchise them play it very straight. We've seen them play it very dramatic. In this case, they did sort of that heightened anime style because this was something that Michael B. Jordan was interested in, and I didn't mind it, to be honest. So anyway, he takes out the champ. Damien does again. It's kind of a good. I also wanted to point out Diamond Damien Anderson. That's pretty cool. That's kind of up there on the charts. I don't know. It doesn't have the ring of a Clubber Lang or a Mason the Lion Dixon. or even a Tommy Gunn, but I think it has a ring to it. I think if they had maybe a cleverer name than Anderson, maybe because that's like saying Jones or Smith or something. But and another thing that was great about this performance was it kind of felt to me like they were harkening back to Clever Lang. Like the last film, we harkened back to the Dragos, and we had the Soviets feeling of it, and all that stuff there in Ukraine and everything. And this one, it felt like it was he could have been the son of Clever Lang. They just didn't want to have that tie in and make it even more, coincidental. But he could obviously have been the son of Clever Lang because he had the exact same situation. I mean, they don't really go into the detail of Clever Lang's life. He might have been in jail, but it's the same thing. He got out of jail. He's just training by himself in his apartment. It's like a dumpy little shack, and he's lifting weights. He's doing push-ups. He's doing it all by himself. He really doesn't have any trainer or mentor. He's just driven to do this himself. So now he's the champ, and Adonis finds out that he set that up so that he would take out Victor Drago out of the picture. So he goes to confront him at the beach. Now, this is probably the best scene, really, in the film because he confronts him, and like all this bitterness finally all comes out of Damien because he kind of finally is like rubbing it in his face that he's taking everything away from him, and he's sort of, he's sort of left on his own to fight for himself now. It's one of those things where you could tell Adonis is kind of afraid of Damien, but it's like he kind of has that respect for him still. And that's what I mean. It's a very clever, dramatic approach. We don't have this in any of the other Rocky films. I think this is where this works so good. This film is this relationship that they have. So again, this is the part now that, like I said, I had the biggest problem with. So we have that great beach scene. Then it's interrupted by the death scene of Marianne. And we also have the ramifications of Adonis having to tell Bianca the whole story, the whole truth, which that goes back to the first Creed. Again, this was all dovetailed very nicely. That, she didn't want to have secrets kept from her and this and that. And it's like, but the problem is the pacing is off in this one instance. In Creed 2, it was a big problem throughout, I think. But in this film, for some reason, they still can't get over having a pacing issue when the drama gets in the way of the fight, the storyline of the fight. Because everything grinds to a halt. And it's not like this is bad drama that shouldn't have been in the movie, but it's paced poorly so that we have the beach scene and we know that Adonis is like ticked off, and we know that, Damien's going to dog him, but none of that happens on screen. The next thing we see is that when he finally is kind of like cleared his chest of the whole situation of Bianca, he goes on the Stephen A. Smith show, and he's basically gonna call out Damien. And Damien's like already got his own pad, and he's all set up, and he's like, it just felt too rushed. It felt like they cut out some development from the movie. And one of the problems is I think they also said that he's been retired for 3 years. Now, this is also difficult to understand. Now, the movie begins with him retiring. When did these 3 years pass? We're not really told a time jump. Has Damien been champion for like 2 years and we don't know it? Or has Damien been practicing and taking fights in between? I don't really know what's going on, and they don't really let you know, and they don't really give you the impetus of there being a fight. It's just like he's on the Stephen A. Smith show, and then Damien. I keep wanting to call him Mason. Damien ends up calling him out on the Stephen A. Smith show, which is a great scene, and they make the fight. But I mean, this is not like Rocky 2, where Apollo has like this big campaign, the Italian chicken or whatever, and he's like trying to dog him to get him into the ring. Or even like Rocky 3, where you have Clever Lang basically continually, you know, uh, dragging up Rocky's name and running it through the mud. You don't have that kind of sense in this film. It just feels like it goes from, well, there's the beach scene, they're ticked off at each other, then it kind of like sidesteps the film for about 20 minutes. Then we sort of jump back into the rivalry, and that one scene is supposed to give us the impetus for this big fight that they're going to have, and that he's going to get back in shape, Adonis, and they're going to fight and they're going to hash it all out. I just felt like they needed that extra jump, an extra 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe, that would have done that. And they could have cut out maybe a couple of things in this film, but I don't think it was much a problem of what they needed to cut out. I think it was, which was the problem with Creed 2 for me. I think in this case, they really just needed to add a little something more. All right, so let's get to the end of the film, the big fight. The everybody loves the big fight at the end. Like I said, we talked about like the montage. The montages are never the same because they don't have that Rocky music. They always try to like have the music inspired somewhat to be kind of like a poor cousin of the Rocky themes, but they just still never will get that kind of sound, and it does make the Creed training scenes feel a little lacking when you don't have that music that really pumps you. And in this case, it's always interesting too to see like they try to outdo themselves on what they're going to do this time. Now we've got Adonis with a freaking plane on his back, dragging a plane, and that was cool. That was fun. But again, there was nothing really about this montage that really was like one of the more memorable ones. I mean, I think the one they did in Creed 2 was far more memorable when he was in the desert and this and that. And there was some things about the first Creed that were memorable. You know, he was like running with the guys on the mopeds or whatever they were. But in this case, the training montage was not very memorable. Now the fight. Now here's where we get the big showdown fight. And again, they kind of just cut to the chase. They don't really have a lot of trash talking. I forget what he says, but he kind of like trash talks him a little bit. Damien, and the fight goes on, and people didn't like this. Now what happens is after a certain number of rounds, I think this was supposed to be the 11th round, the CGI background kind of changes into, there's nobody in the stands, and there's like prison bars behind the ropes, and there's like the punching bag in the corner, and they kind of try to make it very uh, you know, artsy fartsy, for lack of a better term. I wouldn't really want to use that term for it, but that's kind of what it is. And like I said, I didn't really mind this. I know a lot of people said that it took them out of the film and stuff, but the idea was that this was a very personal fight, and they're looking at each other across the ring, and they see each other as kids. I felt that it worked. Now, did they need to do it that way? Probably not. But I think the thing is, when you've seen so many boxing matches during the course of the Rocky films and the Creed films, I don't blame Michael B. Jordan for wanting to mix it up and trying to do something a little different and trying to make this a little more personal, so to speak. So I didn't really have a problem with that. You know, maybe other people did. I know that, like for instance, when in Rocky 5, Rocky has a street fight, and a lot of people didn't feel satisfied by that. And I agreed. I think they should have actually had him fight. And you know, the street fight was okay. I mean, it wasn't like it was badly choreographed or anything. It was the least problem of that film, to be totally honest. But when you veer away from the expectation, I think a lot of times Rocky fans, at least, don't like it. And I think in this case, fans probably are not going to like that he tried that kind of introspective view of the fight. Like I said, it didn't really bother me that much, but I understand if you didn't like it. I'll. It didn't take me out of it, but I think, like I said, I felt like he was trying to do something a little different than what we've seen over the last 8 movies. You know. So again, it doesn't have to always be this way, but the fact that they did that once out of probably, I don't know, 15 fights that have gone on during the Rocky slash Creed films, it didn't bother me. So it was it was also surprising to me that they didn't show the carnage of this one very much. Like in the past two Creed films, Adonis' eye is like completely swollen shut, and you know, there's always like a lot of splash of blood, spitting out blood, and all kinds of stuff in these fights. This one seemed relatively tame to me for that reason. They get a little bruised, but they don't really feel like they've been through a war, which a lot of the Rocky films, I mean, with the exception of probably Rocky 3, where he basically takes Lang out quick because he can't stay in there and slug with him. Basically, they're always these long, drawn out wars where their faces are tattooed with pain. It didn't feel that way in this one. It felt like this was more of there's an emotional punch that's being landed with every punch, not necessarily a physical blow being landed. It's an emotional one. And he sends Damien sends Adonis down with a blow to the solar plexus. And I kind of had the feeling. See, with the films in the Rocky and Creed series, there's always an interesting point in the movie where you're like, is he going to win this one or is he going to lose this one? Because really, you would think the good guy always wins or whatever, but it's really only been 50-50. I mean, Creed lost the first film, the first fight, the same way Rocky did in the first film. It's like, Rocky really didn't beat Mason the Lion Dixon and Rocky Balboa. He lost that one. There's only a few films where you kind of know that the hero has to win this one. Like, I mean, I kind of figured that Rocky was going to be Drago in Rocky 4. It's like he had to avenge Apollo. And it's the same thing here where he kind of had to shut up Damien. And there really would be no resolution unless he did. So of course he comes back. He gets through his defenses. He gives him an uppercut. He knocks him out, and he wins the day. And again, it's very satisfying. But I felt that there was more needed because it was like he needed to put an end to this and not just the fight. And so, fortunately, what they do is they actually have him go back into the locker room and make peace. Now, I think if they didn't have that scene, the ending would have fell flat because one way or another, these guys had to hash it out. It wasn't that Damien is a villain. Is that he needed to have this get off his chest, that he had to get the monkey off his back. He had it on so long that he had to get his frustrations out on Adonis. And of course, he was pretty much in the wrong. It was just the personality traits of his that kind of put him in the wrong because they were both evenly wrong in this situation. Adonis kind of turned his back on him when he went in jail. Marianne didn't let him read the letters that Damien wrote to him to sort of protect him. So I mean, it was like just a bad situation between the two of them, where one wasn't really morally right over the other, but it was just that Damien had just too much pent up rage that had to be satisfied in the ring. And when that's finally done, then you could see them make peace, and it was really the best way to end the film. I thought it was really a satisfying conclusion. And I wanted to mention, I can't believe I haven't mentioned him yet, but like Little Duke, I think that's what they call him. Little Duke is in this. He's been in all the Creed movies. He wasn't in any of the Rocky movies, but he was the son of Duke from all the Rocky films where he was Apollo's trainer originally. Then he like jumped on the Balboa bandwagon for the rest of the films, even as a cameo in 5. So he's supposed to be his son. I'm glad they kept him in, and he's a great character. He's a funny actor as well. I mean, like I said, you don't really have a character that has the laughs of a Paulie in the Creed films, but he's always, kind of the wry humor in the film. And I thought he was great. I was glad to see that he came back, and that they made good use of him. So the film ends with Creed in the ring, horsing around with his daughter and Bianca, and they kind of set up that it feels like very much the end. If this was the end of the franchise, I guess it would be okay because he kind of like leaves the ring and like has a long look around, and it kind of feels like he's saying goodbye. And it could be Michael B. Jordan saying goodbye to the franchise for all we know. But like I said, I guess there could be some more fodder for the Creed franchise going forward. I mean, like I said, they could dig into some of the background that they had with Apollo's children and how that's going to work out. I mean, that could be interesting. I don't know. I don't know really where they go, especially since they at this point they were talking about Adonis like he was an old man. I mean, they were talking to Rocky like that in Rocky Balboa when he was supposed to be like 60 years old or something. So in this case with Creed being, I don't know, 32, 33, and them acting like that, I don't I don't really know if he has a future in the ring. But he is the unified heavyweight champion again. I like the way that the Rocky films have moved through time and history, where in the first Rocky film there was an undisputed champion. Now at this point you need to have three belts, and now because Damien became the unified champion, and now Adonis is the unified champion. The crazy way that boxing is run is reflected in the latter films, so to speak. All right, so if I was to give this a rating, a ranking, a review, a rating, let's see, I would probably give this 3.5 stars out of 5. It's either 3.5 or 4. I might want to give it another watch before I really commit to it, but I think 3.5. I think it's like it's good. It's better than average. It's not average. A 3 or a 2.5 is kind of like average, below average. This is better than average. I don't know if I would give it a 4 because of that one lacking pacing issue. And also, I think that they could have name dropped Rocky. Like I said, the only time that I really missed him was like maybe in the training montage. I think they could have, if he came in, he said one of his little monologues, put him through the paces, and maybe just sat there and watched him at ringside. That was all you really needed of him. I don't really think he had a place in the film that was lacking, that would have been filled with him. But again, we'll see. Maybe he'll show up in a Creed 4 if there is a Creed 4. Yeah, I would definitely give this one a on an alphabet scale. I would give this maybe a B minus, a B minus, something like that. Is it oh, and whatever, let's say 7 out of 10, maybe 7.5 out of 10. If I was to rank these again, I would rather do a full ranking video to give some more detail to the rest of the films and not just talk about it. But we'll talk about the Creed films. I definitely like this one more than the first. I think the first was good. I'm not saying it's bad. The second one is difficult because I think it had more emotional depth. I think it had a little more meat to work with, but they didn't really hit a home run with that one like they should have. So tentatively, I might call it the best of the Creed franchise. It's neck and neck with 2, I think, with Creed 2, depending on how I feel about that maybe when I rewatch it. But again, it felt very much like they were standing Creed on his own 2 feet at this point. So it's tough to say, like, because I liked the inclusion of Rocky and Drago, Ivan Drago in the second one, but they really didn't do enough with them. In this one, there isn't any real callbacks to Rocky or, Ivan Drago or anything else, but there really is even like they're very light on callbacks to Apollo Creed too. So this film really does feel like it stands on its own, but it's okay standing on its own. It doesn't really need the props, I don't think, at this point. So again, Michael B. Jordan, first film as a director. I think he did a great job. I'm not really into like, um, cinematography and composition and all that, but from what I've seen on the screen, what he did looked great to me. All right, so let me know what you think in the comments below for this exhaustive review of Creed 3. Did you enjoy the film? Do you think there's a future for the Creed franchise? Do you think there's a future for Stallone coming back to the Rocky/Creed franchise? Let me know in the comments below. And so until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.